Madam Silk Wraith. By Ben 10. Chapter 1. Emiko gathered her things in the dim light of the Takemura market, the soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She tucked her apron into her bag, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. It was nearly time to pick up Akira and Hana from school, and she had no intention of being late. With one last glance at the empty aisles, she stepped out of the store, the warm afternoon air of Shiranami brushing against her skin. As she walked down the narrow sidewalk, her attention was caught by the harsh, scolding voice of a woman just ahead. Emiko slowed her pace, her gaze drawn to the scene unfolding in front of her. A young boy, probably no older than 6 or 7, was squirming in his mother's grip, his face twisted in defiance. The woman's sharp voice cut through the air, her words making Emiko's stomach tighten. "Stay still. If you don't behave, the spider lady will come for you. Do you hear me?" Emiko's brow furrowed. The woman tugged the boy away, not noticing her words had made the quiet girl pause, even if only for a moment. The name Spider Lady felt nostalgic and unsettling. She shook the thought away and continued on her way, her mind returning to the task at hand, picking up her siblings. When she reached the school, the scene was predictably chaotic, with children shouting and scrambling as they poured out of the building. Her brother, Akira, was the first to spot her, his face lighting up in a grin that never failed to pull at her heart. Hana wasn't far behind, holding her backpack with determination. But it was Akira's teacher who caught her attention. Mrs. Sato approached with a tired expression, adjusting her glasses. She wasted no time, her words coming quickly. "Emiko," she said, her voice stern but not unkind. "I'd like to talk to you about Akira. He failed his second test, and there have been several behavioral issues. I strongly suggest you make sure he studies more. It's important that he catches up before the end of the term." Emiko nodded, her gaze flickering down to her younger brother. "I understand. I'll make sure he works harder." Akira shuffled his feet, clearly eager to escape the conversation. Mrs. Sato gave a final word of advice before turning away, and Emiko ushered her siblings toward the bus stop. She could feel Akira's energy simmering with frustration as they walked, his hands shoving into his pockets. "I'm not stupid," he muttered, kicking at a pebble on the sidewalk. "She's lying. She's mean and a witch." Emiko sighed, a quiet sound that only Akira would recognize. She didn't have the energy for a fight. "Not today. You need to try harder, Akira. If you want to pass to the next grade, you have to put in the effort." He grumbled but said nothing more as they made their way home. Emiko, ever patient, adjusted her grip on their school bags. "I'll make your favorite tonight, and then next week, your second favorite, but you have to promise to focus on your studies." Akira's mood shifted slightly, his sulking replaced by a reluctant nod. "Fine. But I want takoyaki tonight." She smiled softly. "It's a deal." The familiar scent of simmering ingredients filled the apartment when they arrived. Emiko quickly set to work, chopping vegetables, preparing the batter, and getting the takoyaki pan ready. The rhythmic sizzle of the cooking food was calming, even as her thoughts drifted. She had grown used to the weight of responsibility that hung over her life, ever since that thing happened. But as she worked, her mind turned to another task that awaited her after dinner. Riisha would be here soon. The Nemonican girl had become a close friend over the years since moving to Hakurima. Emiko had met her in junior high school, and their bond had been an unexpected comfort. While Emiko worked long hours at the market, Riisha was often there to look after Akira and Hana, a helping hand when the pressure of raising her siblings became too much. Riisha didn't mind. She knew how hard it was for someone her age to carry so much on their shoulders. They were both 22. Such a young age for a burden indeed. The doorbell rang, and Akira and Hana raced to answer it, their excitement palpable. Emiko heard the familiar voice of her friend and smiled, finishing the last bit of cooking. She turned, checking the clock. "I'll be back by 10, she called to her siblings, who were already settled in front of the television, happily distracted by Riisha's presence. "Thanks again, Riisha," Emiko said quietly as she slipped on her shoes. Her friend smiled and waved her off, and Emiko took one last look at her siblings before leaving the apartment. As the door clicked shut behind her, the weight of the world seemed to settle in her chest. She would do anything to make sure they had a better future. Emiko slid into the driver's seat of her car, shutting the door with a quiet sigh. The day had already been long, and the night ahead promised more of the same. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out a small bottle, twisting off the cap with practiced ease. 2 pills rested in her palm for only a moment before she tossed them into her mouth, swallowing them dry. The bitterness lingered on her tongue, but she ignored it. The city of Shiranami stretched before her as she drove, its sleek skyline glowing with brilliant lights. Towering digital screens played advertisements and announcements, their colors reflecting off the pristine streets below. Despite the late hour, the sidewalks were alive with people. Women in elegant kimonos, their faces painted white with delicate red lips, strolled in groups, their laughter ringing softly through the night. Musicians strummed traditional instruments, their melodies weaving into the hum of the city. Everything pulsed with energy, a clear sign of the approaching festival. As Emiko drove past the crowds, she considered bringing Akira and Hana. They hadn't been out much lately, and the festival might be a good distraction, a brief moment where they could just be kids instead of worrying about school or home. By the time she reached the store, the thought had settled in her mind. It was a good idea. She parked and stepped inside, checking in at the front counter before heading toward the back to start her shift. She barely had time to settle in when her boss approached. "Emiko," he said, arms crossed. His voice was even, but there was a sharpness to it. "You've been slipping lately. I need you to do better." Emiko straightened, pushing back the exhaustion weighing on her. "I understand. I'll do better." Her boss studied her for a moment, before giving a small, satisfied nod. "Good." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone once more. She took a deep breath before heading toward the shelves, grabbing a box of inventory to stock. She was reaching for a spot on the shelf when she suddenly bumped into someone. The force sent her stumbling back, and before she could catch herself, she landed on the ground. "Ah, I'm so sorry." A voice came above her, hurried and apologetic. A hand reached out to her, and she took it, allowing herself to be pulled back to her feet. She looked up to see a young man with dark hair and an easygoing expression. He bent down, gathering the fallen products and handing them back to her. "Here," he said, his tone warm. "Didn't mean to knock you over." Emiko took the items, nodding slightly. "It's fine." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then, with a grin, he asked, "What's a girl as beautiful as you doing working in a place like this?" Emiko blinked, caught off guard by the sudden compliment. For a brief moment, a small smile tugged at her lips, but it faded just as quickly. "I'm saving up for college." "Ah, makes sense." He slipped his hands into his pockets. "I'm Kenji, by the way." "Emiko." Kenji's grin widened. "You going to the festival?" She hesitated before nodding. "I think so." "Good. Hope I see you there." With a casual wave, he turned and disappeared down the aisle. Emiko watched him go for a moment before shaking her head and returning to her work. It had been an unexpected moment, but she didn't dwell on it. She had a long shift ahead, and there was no time for distractions. As Emiko finished her shift and stepped outside, the cool night air was a welcome relief from the stuffy warmth of the store. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Risha. "Risha, your siblings missed you so much they swore they heard your voice calling them from outside their bedroom window, while I was in the kitchen heating up food." Emiko frowned slightly, typing out a quick response. "Emiko, they have wild imaginations." Risha, "Yeah, I figured. Just thought it was funny." They were really convinced for a second. Shaking her head with a small smile, Emiko pocketed her phone and started the drive home. When she arrived, she found Risha sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Akira and Hana's shoes were neatly lined up by the door, a clear sign they had gone to bed without a fight. "Thanks again for watching them," Emiko said, pulling some money from her bag. She held it out, but Risha waved it away. "You don't have to pay me," Risha insisted. "Just let me know if you ever need me again." Emiko hesitated before nodding. "All right." As Risha grabbed her jacket, she glanced back at Emiko. "Hey, are you going to the festival?" "I am," Emiko said, setting her bag down. "I thought it'd be nice to take Akira and Hana. You should come with us." Risha grinned. "Sounds fun. I'll be there." Emiko leaned against the counter, debating whether to mention it before finally saying, "I met someone at work today, some guy named Kenji. He said he'd be at the festival too." Risha raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and do you like him?" Emiko scoffed, crossing her arms. "Dating isn't exactly on my mind." Her tone was light, teasing, but there was a truth beneath it. Risha smirked. "Maybe this time will be different." "Not likely." They exchanged goodbyes, and Emiko locked the door behind her as Risha left. The apartment was silent now, the faint hum of the city outside the only sound. She peeked into Akira and Hana's room, finding them both curled up beneath their blankets, fast asleep. With a quiet exhale, she retreated to her own room, changing into something more comfortable before sinking onto her bed. Tomorrow was another day. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains as Emiko stretched, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The quiet murmur of the city outside was a stark contrast to the energy she knew the night would bring. She pushed herself out of bed and stepped into the hallway, where her siblings were already stirring. "We're going to the festival later today," she announced, leaning against the doorframe. "Risha and Kenji are coming too." Akira and Hana's faces lit up instantly. "Really?" Akira beamed. "You mean it?" Emiko smirked at his excitement. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it." The day passed in a flurry of preparation. Emiko helped Hana into a yukata, making sure the sash was tied neatly, while Akira bounced impatiently, eager to get going. Once everyone was ready, they set off, the streets growing more lively the closer they got to the festival. The festival grounds were awash in color and light. Red and gold lanterns hung in the air, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets. The scent of grilled food and sweet treats drifted through the air, mingling with the sound of drums and flutes. As they entered, Emiko spotted Risha waiting near the main path. It's been forever since we've gone to a festival together, Risha said, adjusting the sleeve of her blouse. Emiko gave a small nod, watching a group of performers in traditional kimonos pass by. Their faces were painted white with crimson lips, their voices rising in a haunting melodic song as they moved in synchronized steps. Behind them, musicians played flutes and taiko drums, their deep, rhythmic beats echoing through the streets. A tap on her shoulder made Emiko turn. Kenji. He grinned, opening his arms for a hug. Emiko hesitated. For a moment, she considered brushing it off, but Risha's amused gaze was already on her. Sighing, she stepped into the brief embrace. "You are so non-affectionate," Risha whispered with a smirk as Emiko pulled away. Kenji chuckled as Riesha introduced herself, and the three fell into easy conversation. "Festivals here haven't changed much since we were kids," Kenji remarked, looking around. "Yeah," Risha agreed, glancing at the decorations. "Same music, same performances. But I guess that's part of the charm." As they spoke, Akira and Hana ran ahead, mesmerized by the grand floats rolling down the street. Each float was decorated with intricate dragon designs, their eyes glowing like embers beneath the festival lights. Dancers dressed as mythical creatures followed behind, their elaborate costumes shimmering in the lantern glow. One performer in a pink dragon costume paused, crouching in front of Hana, before handing her a delicate flower. Hana gasped in delight, clutching the flower to her chest. Emiko watched her sister's happiness, a faint warmth settling in her chest. It had been a long time since they'd had a night like this one without stress, without worry. For the first time in a while, she let herself relax. Chapter 2. The festival's energy pulsed around them. Music, laughter, the steady beat of drums filling the air. Emiko let herself get lost in the moment, watching the parade of dancers, the glimmering floats, and the warm lantern light that bathed the streets in gold. Hana clutched her flower tightly, her eyes wide, but something felt off. A creeping unease settled in Emiko's chest, an instinctual pull at the back of her mind. It took her a moment to realize why. Akira was gone. Her stomach dropped. She turned sharply, scanning the crowd. He had been right beside her just moments ago. "Risha," she said quickly, her voice tense. "Watch Hana, I need to find Akira." Risha's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" He was just here. But Emiko was already moving. She shoved through the throng of festival-goers, her heart pounding. "Akira!" she shouted, twisting past people, barely registering their annoyed glances. No answer. She pushed forward, her breath quickening. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. Akira stood at the edge of a dimly lit alleyway, his small frame poised as if he were about to step inside. Emiko rushed over and grabbed his wrist. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharper than intended. "You scared me half to death." Akira looked up at her, his expression eerily calm. "Mommy was calling me," he said matter-of-factly. "She told me to come here." A chill ran down Emiko's spine. Slowly, she turned her gaze to the alleyway. It was empty. The darkness swallowed everything past a few feet. No movement, no figures, no sign of anyone at all. Her grip tightened on Akira's wrist. "There's no one here, Akira," she said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I heard her," he insisted, his brows furrowing. Emiko swallowed, glancing once more into the void before shaking her head. "Come on, let's go back to the festival." Akira hesitated, his eyes lingering on the alleyway, but then he nodded, letting Emiko guide him away. When they returned, Risha and Kenji immediately turned to them. "Is everything okay?" Kenji asked, concern flickering across his face. "Yeah," Emiko lied smoothly, forcing a small smile. "Everything's fine." Neither Riesha nor Kenji looked convinced, but they let it go. The festival continued, the vibrant performances reclaiming their attention. As the night wound down, they exchanged goodbyes. Kenji lingered for a moment, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hey, you want to hang out again soon?" Emiko hesitated before nodding. "Sure." Kenji grinned. "Great, I'll text you." With that, they parted ways. As Emiko led her siblings home, her mind kept circling back to the alley, and to Akira's words, "Mommy was calling me." She shook the thought away, but a lingering unease followed her all the way home. The night passed in uneasy silence. Emiko lay in bed, exhaustion weighing down her limbs. She reached for the small bottle on her nightstand, popped 2 pills into her mouth, and swallowed them dry. Within minutes, the fog of sleep pulled her under. Then, she was home. Not the apartment, but home. The warm scent of grass and earth surrounded her, the air thick with the sounds of summer cicadas. She sat under the old tree in the backyard of her childhood home, its familiar branches swaying gently above her. Beside her, her mother sat with a book in her lap, her delicate fingers turning the pages as she read aloud in a soft, melodic voice. Emiko smiled, feeling small again. Safe. Her mother turned to her with a playful glint in her eye. "You always loved this story?" she said teasingly. Emiko giggled, leaning against her. The warmth of her presence was comforting. So real. Then, something skittered over her hand. A tiny spider. She watched it crawl up her wrist, its fragile legs delicate against her skin. But as she looked up, her stomach turned to ice. Her father stood before her. The joy in her mother's voice faded. The cicadas stopped buzzing. Emiko's breath hitched as her father's face twisted into something monstrous. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide. His eyes, once human, melted into bottomless pits of black. She turned to her mother for help, but her mother had changed too. Dark, bruised fingerprints wrapped around her throat. Blood soaked her clothes, dripping from the corner of her lips. Her eyes, like her father's, were hollow pools of blackness, and when she spoke, it was in a voice that no longer belonged to her. "Why didn't you save me, Emiko?" A shriek tore from Emiko's throat. Then, she was awake. Her chest heaved, her body trembling as she sat upright in bed. The shadows in the room seemed deeper, stretching unnaturally across the walls. For a long moment she simply sat there, catching her breath, trying to shake off the lingering terror clawing at her chest. She needed water. Pushing the covers aside, she made her way to the kitchen, her footsteps quiet against the floor. She filled a glass, her hands still unsteady as she took a sip. A noise behind her. She turned sharply, heart hammering. Akira and Hanayana stood in the doorway, their small figures barely illuminated by the faint glow of the moon through the window. For just a second, her pulse spiked, seeing them there so silently, watching her. But then, she noticed their faces. Wide, frightened eyes. "Emiko." Hana's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we sleep in your room?" Akira nodded quickly. "We got scared." Emiko swallowed, pushing away her own lingering fear. She set the glass down and walked over to them, placing a reassuring hand on their heads. "Yeah," she said softly. "Come on." She led them back to her room, letting them crawl under the blankets beside her. As she lay there between them, their small bodies pressed close, the nightmare still clung to the edges of her mind. But she didn't close her eyes. Not for a long time. A week later, the insistent ring of Emiko's alarm cut through the quiet of the early morning. She lay still for a moment before sitting up and stretching, the soft light of dawn creeping through the window. In the adjoining room, the gentle breathing of her siblings reminded her of the day's demands. With practiced care, she roused Akira and Hana, urging them to get ready for school. Breakfast was a quiet affair, a few hushed words and hurried preparations, before she bundled them up and set off for work. The brisk morning air of Shiranami accompanied her on the short walk to Takemura Market. Today she was greeted by the familiar warm smile of Mrs. Yamada, the kind elderly lady who shared the shift with her. Emiko returned the greeting, and the two exchanged a few pleasant words, the slow rhythm of their conversation easing the early day tension. "Have you ever heard of the abandoned Toriyama village?" Mrs. Yamada asked in a hushed tone, as they prepared the store for opening. Emiko paused, wiping down a counter. "I've heard whispers," she replied softly, "but I don't really know much about it." Mrs. Yamada's eyes lit up with a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. It used to be a thriving place, destined to be an important town, but then, things took a turn. Her voice trailed off, leaving a lingering sense of mystery and regret in the air. Before the tale could continue, their boss strode in, his tone brisk, as he announced that it was time to open the store. Mrs. Yamada gave Emiko a gentle nod. "We'll talk more later, dear," she murmured, before heading off to clean the bathrooms. Left alone, Emiko methodically began checking the shelves, restocking and arranging the merchandise. The hours dragged by as she worked through her tasks, quiet moments punctuated by the hum of the store and the distant sounds of the city awakening outside. Though the day was long and the work demanding, the brief conversation about Toriyama Village lingered in her mind, a small mystery amidst the routine of her daily life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Emiko arrived at the school. She spotted Hana and Akira waiting near the entrance, but before she could call out to them, Akira's teacher approached with a familiar, concerned look. "Emiko," the teacher began gently. "Akira was doing well for a while, but I've noticed he's started slipping again. He's been distracted in class, and he had another outburst today." Emiko sighed, already feeling the weight of the conversation before it even started. "I'll talk to him," she assured the teacher. The walk home was silent. Hana clutched Emiko's hand, while Akira trailed behind, kicking at stray pebbles. Once inside, Emiko set her bag down and turned to her brother. "Akira, what's going on? You promised you'd do better." Akira's expression darkened. "You always believed the teacher over me," he muttered. "That's not true." "Yes, it is." His voice rose, frustration boiling over. "You always act like I'm lying. Stop telling me what to do, you're not our mom." The words stung like ice. "I hate you," Akira screamed. "Mom would have believed me." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Then, without another word, he ran to his room, slamming the door behind him. Hana sat quietly on the floor, her small hands moving her dolls back and forth, pretending not to have heard anything. Emiko let out a slow breath, rubbing her temples before heading to the kitchen. Cooking would help. It always did. Later that evening, as the food simmered on the stove, she called Riesha. Akira had another tantrum, Emiko admitted, rubbing her forehead. It's been happening more often. Risha's voice was calm as always. It's normal. Some kids struggle more with anger, especially after what you guys have been through. But with the right support, he'll grow out of it. Emiko sighed. I hope so. If you ever need a break, I can watch them again, Risha offered. Are you sure? Of course. Relieved, Emiko thanked her. When Risha arrived, Emiko grabbed her bag and slipped out the door, heading to her therapy appointment. The fluorescent lights in the therapist's office buzzed faintly as Emiko sat across from the familiar figure of Dr. Watanabe, her hands resting tensely in her lap. The sessions had become routine, but tonight, exhaustion weighed heavier than usual. Dr. Watanabe adjusted her glasses and offered a small smile. How have you been feeling since our last session? Emiko hesitated before answering. The medication isn't helping. She exhaled, trying to suppress the frustration bubbling beneath her voice. The nightmares and flashbacks haven't stopped. If anything, they feel worse. Dr. Watanabe nodded, jotting notes down in her notepad. I understand. Sometimes, certain medications don't work as expected. I'll look into alternatives that may be a better fit for you. Emiko gave a tired nod, gripping the hem of her sleeve. She knew it wasn't as simple as switching pills. The memories weren't just chemical imbalances. They were scars that refused to fade. The therapist shifted her approach. How are your siblings doing? How has your relationship with them been lately? Emiko let out a slow breath. It's hard. I'm trying my best, but I don't know if it's enough. I don't want them taken away from me. The weight of those words sat heavy between them. Dr. Watanabe's expression remained soft, encouraging her to continue. Bills keep going up, Emiko admitted. I barely have enough to keep things running. And on top of that, I don't even think I'm keeping them happy. She hated saying it out loud. It made the guilt feel more real. Dr. Watanabe listened attentively, writing down her words before meeting Emiko's gaze. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders, but I want you to know what you're doing is enough. You're doing the best you can, and that matters. Emiko swallowed, unsure if she believed it. Let's take this one step at a time. Dr. Watanabe reassured her. We'll explore different treatment options, and we'll work on ways to manage the stress. You're not alone in this. The words should have been comforting. But as Emiko sat there, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the window, she wasn't sure if she'd ever feel like she was truly in control. After Emiko's therapy session ended, she stepped outside, exhaling as she checked her phone. A new message from Kenji popped up. Kenji. Hey, want to meet at the library? She stared at the text for a moment, before typing back. Emiko. Sure, I'll head there now. Sliding her phone into her pocket, she made her way toward the library. When she arrived, Kenji was already waiting near the entrance, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. As soon as he spotted her, he straightened up and grinned. You should smile more, he teased. Emiko sighed. And you should stop saying that. Kenji chuckled, pushing open the library door. Come on. Inside, the familiar scent of old paper and polished wood filled the air. The quiet hum of hushed voices and the rustling of pages surrounded them. My mom used to bring me here all the time when I was a kid, Kenji said as they walked through the aisles. Emiko glanced at the shelves. Mine too, but we stopped after a while. She got too busy with work. She hesitated before adding, I still have a book she never returned. Kenji raised an eyebrow. You stole from the library? It wasn't on purpose, Emiko muttered. Kenji smirked, but didn't push further. As they browsed, he suddenly pulled a worn book from the shelf, its cover depicting a dark, looming figure with long, spindly limbs. The title read, The Spider Lady. Look at this, he said, holding it up. Emiko's eyes narrowed. Haven't seen that in a while. You know the story, right? Kenji asked. Yeah, it was used to scare kids into behaving, but people don't really talk about it much anymore. Kenji flipped through the pages. My mother used to warn me about her all the time. Now it's mostly older folks who bring it up. Emiko thought back to the old lady at work mentioning Toriyama Village before their boss had cut her off. A chill ran down her spine, but she shook it off. Kenji held up the book. Want to read it? Emiko hesitated, then shrugged. Why not? They made their way to a nearby table, the dim library lights casting long shadows over the pages as they began to read. Kenji flipped to the first page, his voice steady but low, as he read aloud to Emiko. Many centuries ago, in a quiet village that would later be known as Toriyama, a woman named Kiwa was forced into marriage with a man from the powerful and wealthy Toriyama family, Sakazuki Toriyama. Emiko listened intently, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table. Kiwa was known for her gentle nature and her love for animals, particularly spiders. While others feared them, she admired their patience and the intricate webs they wove. But her love for these creatures would one day become part of a much darker tale. Kenji glanced at Emiko, but she remained focused, so he continued. Her husband, Sakazuki, was rumored to be a cruel and abusive man, though nothing was ever confirmed. Some whispered that he mistreated Kiwa and, eventually, their children as well. Then, one day, without warning, Kiwa and her children disappeared without a trace. A chill crept up Emiko's spine. No one knew what had become of them. Some believed they had run away, while others feared something much worse had happened behind closed doors. Sakazuki, however, claimed that after their disappearance, he began seeing hallucinations of his wife and children. Night after night, he saw their pale, hollow-eyed faces staring at him from the shadows, heard their whispers in the dark. It drove him mad, until one day, he ended it all taking his own life in a fit of insanity. Kenji turned the page, his voice dropping to an eerie hush. Not long after his death, the stories of the Spider Lady began. People spoke of a ghostly woman with long, spindly limbs and hollow eyes, lurking in the abandoned corners of the village. Rumors spread that she was Kiwa's restless spirit, twisted by sorrow and rage. Over time, disappearances in the area, both of children and adults, were blamed on her. Some say she weaves her web in the darkness, waiting for those who wander too far into the unknown. Silence settled between them as Kenji finished reading. "Well," he said finally, closing the book. That was unsettling. Emiko exhaled, her shoulders tense. No wonder parents used this story to scare their kids. Kenji nodded. "Yeah, but I bet there's some truth to it. Most legends come from somewhere." Emiko thought back to the old woman at work, who had tried to tell her about Toriyama Village before being interrupted. Maybe this wasn't just some old folk tale. "Do you think people still believe in her?" Emiko asked. Kenji tapped the book. "Dunno, but if the stories were true, then she's still out there." A strange feeling settled in Emiko's gut, but she shook it off. It was just a story. Chapter 3. An old man's voice was low and gravelly as he stepped closer to them, his presence almost blending into the dimly lit aisles of the library. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, eyes flicking between Emiko and Kenji. "You two were talking about the Spider Lady." Kenji glanced at Emiko before nodding. "Yeah, we were just reading about her." The old man gave a slow, knowing nod. "That's no mere folktale, kids. The woman they speak of, she lived in the abandoned village not too far from here. Toriyama, it was called." Emiko's fingers tensed against the table, but she didn't say anything. "The man she married," the old man continued, "he was supposed to be the leader of that village. After he ended himself, the whole place started falling apart. It was like a curse had settled over it. The village never got the chance to become the prosperous town it was meant to be. And then, one by one, people started disappearing." Kenji leaned in slightly. "Disappearing?" The old man nodded grimly. "First, it was the children, then the women, then the men, whole families. Just gone without a trace. Whatever was in that village picked them off, one after another. Eventually, no one was left. People tried to reclaim the land a few times, but it never lasted. Strange things happened. People went missing. Some who wandered too close to the ruins swore they saw something, someone watching them from the darkness." A small shiver ran down Emiko's spine, but she kept her face neutral. The old man continued, his voice dropping to an eerie hush. "They say that even today, travelers who get lost and stray too close to Toriyama might see a figure in the distance. A woman in an old-fashioned kimono, standing just at the edge of the trees. Some take it as a warning to turn back. Others they call out to her, and if she moves, if she turns and starts walking away." He let the words hang in the air for a moment before finishing. "Some have followed her, and those who do, they don't come back." Kenji exhaled. "That's creepy as hell." The old man chuckled darkly. "Aye, but the worst part isn't just seeing her. Some claim to have heard something, late at night, when the wind is just right. Crying, the same kind of cries a woman makes when she's been beaten and broken. Some say it's Kiwa, forever reliving her suffering. Others they say it's a warning." Emiko's hands curled into fists in her lap. The story itself didn't scare her, but something about the way the old man described Kiwa's cries twisted something inside her. It brought back something else, a sound buried deep in her memories. A woman's cries, her mother's cries. She swallowed hard and forced herself to stay composed, but Kenji must have noticed the change in her expression. He shifted slightly beside her. The old man sighed and straightened up. "You kids best be careful what stories you go looking into. Some things are better left forgotten." With that, he turned and shuffled away, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. Kenji let out a breath. Well, that was unsettling. Emiko nodded, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Kenji ran his fingers over the worn cover of the book before heading toward the front desk. "I think I'll check this out," he said. Emiko raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Kenji hesitated, gripping the book a little tighter. "It's a long story," he finally said. "I'll tell you later." Emiko stared at him for a moment, but decided not to press. "All right." As they stepped out of the library, the sky was darkening, the first hints of evening creeping in. The air had a slight chill to it. Kenji shifted the book under his arm. "If you're interested, I'll tell you everything I learned from it," he said. "Might help you understand why I want to know more about the Spider Lady." Emiko nodded. "Okay." With that, they went their separate ways. When Emiko got home, the apartment was quiet, except for the faint sound of her siblings playing in their room. She could hear their muffled laughter, a small relief after the day she'd had. Risha was in the living room, watching the news. The glow from the TV cast flickering light across her face as she sat comfortably, one leg tucked under the other. Emiko walked over and sat beside her, leaning her head against Risha's shoulder. Risha glanced at her. "You okay?" Emiko sighed, her tone as nonchalant as ever, but carrying an unmistakable exhaustion. It was fine. Risha wasn't convinced. She knew Emiko too well, maybe even better than Emiko knew herself. She had always been there, even back in upper senior school, when other girls had tried to bully Emiko for being too skinny. Risha had been the fighter between them, never backing down from a confrontation. If anyone dared to cross the line and get physical with Emiko, Risha was the one who handled it. Even when her other friends didn't like Emiko, Risha didn't care. She fought for her. Always. Their bond was closer than just friendship. It was like having a sister. Emiko let out another breath, her gaze fixed on the TV, but her mind elsewhere. She was grateful for Risha, more than words could ever express. She wondered, just for a moment, if all people in Nomonica were like her. As they sat in the living room, Emiko told Risha about the Spider Lady story she and Kenji had come across. Risha, being from Nomonica, wasn't familiar with the legend, so Emiko filled her in on what she knew. "That's creepy as hell," Risha said, shivering slightly. "And people actually believe in this?" "Some do," Emiko replied. "It's not as common anymore, but older people still talk about it, like the lady at work scaring her kid with it." Risha shook her head. "That's wild." Then, as if remembering something, she perked up. "Oh, before I forget, my cousins are having a sleepover. You think your siblings would want to come?" Emiko considered it. If it were anyone else asking, she wouldn't trust them. But Risha was different, more than just a friend. She was practically family, like a godmother or godsister to Akira and Hana. "Yeah, that's fine," Emiko said. "They'll like that." "What about you?" Risha asked. "I think I'll stay home tonight. I'll join you guys tomorrow." A little time alone sounded nice. Before they left, Akira hesitated by the door. His small hands fidgeted at his sides before he looked up at Emiko. "I'm sorry for getting mad at you," he mumbled. Emiko softened. "It's okay." Akira stepped forward and hugged her. She hugged him back before watching them leave with Risha. Finally, she was alone. For the first time in a while, Emiko could just exist without worrying about anyone else. She settled onto the couch, watching TV, letting her mind drift. After a while, she turned everything off and went to bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, Emiko woke up. At first, she wasn't sure why. The apartment was silent. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the stillness. Then she heard it, a woman crying. Emiko sat up, her heart beating a little faster. The sound was distant at first, but as she listened, it grew louder. She got out of bed, cautiously stepping into the living room. The cries were coming from right outside her front door. Slowly, she moved toward the window. Her fingers twitched as she pulled back the curtain, peering outside. Nothing. The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. Emiko exhaled, shaking her head. "I'm just tired." She turned away, ready to go back to bed. "Emiko." Her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother's voice. For a second, she stood frozen. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "No." She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to move. "It's in my head." That was all. Just in my head. Without another word, she went back to her room. It took a long time to fall asleep again. Emiko woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She squinted at the screen Kenji was calling. She sighed and answered. "Hello." "Hey," Kenji's voice came through, sounding a little tense. "Can you meet me at the coffee shop?" She rubbed her eyes. "Now?" "Yeah, it's important." Something about his tone made her sit up. "All right, I'll be there soon." When Emiko arrived at the coffee shop, Kenji was already seated at a small table near the window, tapping his fingers against his cup. He looked up as she approached, giving her a quick nod. "Hey." She sat down across from him. "So, what did you find?" He hesitated, his fingers tightening around his cup. Then he exhaled and leaned forward. "I've been looking into the Spider Lady, because of recent rumor sightings, actually. People have reported seeing a woman in an old-fashioned kimono around the city. Some even claim to hear voices that sound like their loved ones." Emiko's stomach clenched slightly at that. She thought about the voice she had heard last night, the voice that had called her name, but she didn't say anything. Kenji continued, his expression darkening. "My older brother and his girlfriend disappeared while camping outside the city, near the abandoned Toriyama village." Emiko's eyes widened. "Are you saying you think the Spider Lady took him?" Kenji clenched his fists. "Yes." His voice was firm, filled with determination. "That's why I'm going there. Me and some friends were going to find him." For a second, Emiko thought he had to be joking, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. He was serious. She frowned. "Kenji, even if she was real, wouldn't it be dangerous to go to her home?" Kenji nodded. "I know. That's why we're preparing." Some of my friends are bringing religious artifacts. They even found verses to shout at the monster, in case it really is her. They think it could hinder or even banish her. Emiko bit her lip. This all sounded ridiculous, but at the same time, she understood. She knew the feeling of losing someone, the desperation of wanting to bring them back. Kenji didn't even know if his brother was alive. She sighed. Just be careful. Kenji gave her a small, reassuring smile. Don't worry, I'll come back and tell you how it goes. No service out there, so I won't be able to contact anyone. Emiko didn't say anything, but a small part of her felt uneasy. They said their goodbyes, and she watched as he walked away. Emiko sat in her car, staring blankly through the windshield. She hadn't started the engine yet. Her fingers rested on the steering wheel, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought back to when her aunt was still alive. The memory was so vivid it felt like she was there again, sitting in the hospital room, the air thick with antiseptic. She remembered the doctor's voice, calm yet firm. Post-traumatic stress disorder and hemophobia, likely developed after witnessing the incident with her mother. Emiko blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if to rid herself of the memory. But it was quickly replaced by another, her father's face, twisted with rage. She exhaled sharply, her hands trembling. She reached into her bag, pulling out her new medication, and quickly took the dose. After a few deep breaths, she decided it was time to go to Risha's house. When she arrived, an uneasy feeling settled in her stomach. Risha's car was parked outside, but something was off. The front door was slightly open. Emiko frowned and stepped closer. Risha? She called out. No answer. Cautiously, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent. Too silent. She took a few steps forward, her eyes scanning the living room. That's when she saw them. Deep, jagged marks ran across the walls, as if something had slashed through them. The furniture was intact, but the air felt heavy, charged with something unnatural. A chill ran down her spine. Risha? Akira? Hana? She called again, her voice a little unsteady. Still nothing. As she moved further inside, her foot landed on something wet. She froze. Slowly, she looked down. A dark red puddle spread across the floor beneath her. Her breath hitched. Blood! Her heart pounded violently against her chest as she stumbled back, her entire body going cold. She bolted out of the house, pulling out her phone with shaking hands and dialing emergency services. The police arrived swiftly, the house soon swarming with investigators. Emiko stood outside, arms wrapped around herself, her body trembling. An officer approached her, his expression grave. We've tested the blood. It belongs to Risha. Emiko felt her stomach drop, but there's no sign of her, your siblings, or the other children. Her breathing quickened, panic clawing at her throat. Then, where are they? She demanded, her voice breaking. The officer tried to reassure her. We'll find them as soon as possible. Calm. How could she be calm? Her vision blurred with tears as she gripped her own arms tighter, trying to steady her breathing. But it was no use. No, no, no. She was losing more loved ones. Again. Chapter 4. A day later, Risha and Emiko's siblings had missing posters up alongside the other posters of people who had recently gone missing. Emiko had taken the day off from work. She needed time to think, to process, to breathe. But no matter what she did, she couldn't calm herself down. She had cried all night, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Desperate for a distraction, she decided to take a walk. The cold air felt sharp against her skin, grounding her, but it did little to quiet the storm inside her. As she walked, she unexpectedly ran into Mrs. Yamada, the old co-worker from her job. Mrs. Yamada gave her a warm smile. Emiko, you didn't come in today either. Are you feeling unwell? Emiko hesitated before answering, her voice strained. Yeah, I just needed some time. Mrs. Yamada's smile faded as she studied Emiko's face. Something is wrong, isn't it? Emiko tried to hold back her emotions, but her throat tightened and her eyes burned. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. My siblings and my best friend, they're missing. I don't know what happened to them. Mrs. Yamada's expression darkened. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and pulled Emiko into a gentle but firm embrace. My dear, I'm so sorry, she whispered. After a moment, she pulled back and looked Emiko in the eyes. Come with me. Emiko wiped her eyes and followed, as Mrs. Yamada led her through narrow streets until they reached a small old shop tucked away between larger buildings. The air inside was thick, with the scent of aged wood and incense. The walls were lined with wooden charms, scrolls, and old books. Emiko looked around, confusion settling in. Mrs. Yamada, what is this place? Mrs. Yamada didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to a small shelf, carefully selecting a wooden charm before turning back to Emiko. She placed the charm into Emiko's palm, holding her hand gently. You said your siblings and your friend disappeared, she said softly. Emiko's fingers tightened around the charm as dread crawled up her spine. Do you know something? Mrs. Yamada exhaled slowly, her usual warmth replaced with something much more serious. I might have an idea of where they've gone. Emiko sat quietly in the small shop, her fingers still curled around the wooden charm Mrs. Yamada had given her. The old woman sat across from her, her expression solemn. "Do you remember when we were talking about the spider lady at work?" Mrs. Yamada asked. Emiko nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember." Mrs. Yamada sighed, folding her hands in her lap. "I believe that might have something to do with your missing loved ones." Emiko's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Yamada leaned in slightly, her voice dropping lower as if afraid someone or something might be listening. "Lately, there have been strange occurrences, whispers, sightings of a woman in a kimono, and people hearing voices that sound like their loved ones calling out to them. And then they disappear." Emiko shivered. The memory of the voice calling her name the other night, her mother's voice, crept back into her mind. Mrs. Yamada continued. "The people who believe in her, those who track her movements, say she's become more active beyond the Toriyama village. It's unusual. She used to stay near the abandoned village, luring in those foolish enough to wander too close. But now, it's as if she's seeking victims elsewhere." "But why?" Emiko asked, frowning. "Why the city?" Mrs. Yamada shook her head. "We don't know for sure. Maybe she's growing more bloodthirsty. Fewer people venture into that cursed village anymore, so perhaps she's hunting in new territory." It sounded ridiculous. It should have been ridiculous. But Emiko remembered Kinji's desperation, the disappearances, and the voice at her door. Doubt and fear twisted inside her. Mrs. Yamada studied Emiko's expression before speaking again. "This shop had belonged to my mother before she passed. I never understood the kind of things she was involved in, but she dealt with the supernatural. Spirits, curses, creatures like the spider lady. These charms," she gestured to the shelves around them, "are meant to ward off spirits and demons. I don't know if they will work against her, but it's better than nothing." Emiko looked down at the charm in her hand. It was small, carved with strange symbols she didn't recognize. It felt warm against her palm. Mrs. Yamada met her eyes. "Be careful, Emiko. Don't let Madame Silkwraith manipulate you into falling into her hands." Emiko's breath caught. "Madame Silkwraith? That's the name the people of Toriyama village called her," Mrs. Yamada explained. Emiko swallowed hard. Somehow, hearing the name made everything feel more real. She stood up, gripping the charm tightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Yamada, for telling me all of this." Mrs. Yamada nodded. "I just hope it helps." Emiko left the shop, her mind spinning with everything she had just heard. She wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Was all of this real? Was there truly a vengeful spirit behind the disappearances? She drove home in silence, trying to piece together the truth. Emiko sat on her bed, her fingers curled tightly around the charm Mrs. Yamada had given her. Her mind raced, trying to plan her next move. If Madame Silkwraith really did take her siblings and Risha, then she couldn't just sit here and do nothing. She had to act. She glanced at the clock. The sun was already beginning to set. Going out now would be reckless. She knew that much. If she was going to the Toriyama village, she needed to be prepared. With a deep breath, she grabbed her backpack and began stuffing it with everything she might need: bottles of water, as much food as she could fit, a flashlight, and a pocket knife. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. After double-checking her bag, she finally laid down, hoping to get some rest before the long journey ahead. She woke with a start. A loud crash echoed through her apartment, the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. Emiko's heart pounded in her chest as she sat up, her body stiff with fear. Her breath hitched when she heard it. "Emiko!" A voice. Small. Shaky. Akira's voice. Her stomach dropped. "Akira?" she whispered. Her feet hit the floor before she could think. She rushed to her bedroom door, her hand gripping the doorknob. But then, she stopped. Something wasn't right. Akira was missing. He had been missing for over a day now. So how could he be standing right outside her door? "Emiko," the voice called again. "Please come out." A chill ran down her spine. Her fingers trembled on the doorknob. Her instinct screamed at her, "Don't open it." Something was very, very wrong. She then heard another voice call out. It was Hana. "Emiko, please open the door," her little sister's voice pleaded, eerily similar to how Akira had just spoken. Emiko stayed silent, her body rigid. Then another voice. A voice she hadn't heard in years. "Emiko, sweetheart." Her mother. Emiko's breath hitched. A lump formed in her throat as her hands trembled at her sides. "Please let me in." Her mother's voice was soft, gentle, just like she remembered. But something was wrong. The longer it spoke, the more it changed. The warmth drained from it, the syllables stretching unnaturally. Her mother's voice deepened, distorted, warped into something that sounded less human with every passing second. "Please let me in." A cold shiver ran down Emiko's spine. Her hands moved on their own, twisting the lock on the knob with a soft click. Then, knock. The gentle sound made her flinch. "Emiko," her mother's voice called again, sounding sweet once more. "Open the door." The doorknob rattled. Emiko took a step back, pressing a hand against her chest to calm her erratic breathing. Silence. Then, bang. The entire door shuddered. Bang, bang. It wasn't knocking anymore. Someone was trying to force its way inside. Then, as if to confirm her worst fears, A laugh echoed through the room. A woman's laugh, high, shrill, filled with a twisted kind of joy. It sent ice through her veins. Emiko stepped as far away from the door as she could, gripping the charm Mrs. Yamada had given her. The banging continued, growing more erratic, shaking the walls of her tiny apartment. Whoever, whatever, was on the other side was strong enough to break the door down. So why hadn't it? She didn't want to find out. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. No knocking. No laughing. Emiko didn't dare move. She grabbed the lamp from her nightstand, clutching it like a weapon, and pressed herself against the wall. She didn't sleep. She just stood there, waiting, frozen in fear, until the first rays of sunlight crept through her window. She slowly got up, her body stiff from staying in the same position all night. Her grip on the lamp loosened, but she still held it firmly as she stepped toward the door. Pausing, she pressed her ear against it. Silence. She strained to hear even the faintest sound, breathing, footsteps, anything. Nothing. Cautiously, she turned the knob and cracked the door open just enough to peek through. The hallway was empty. She hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open fully. Her footsteps were light as she made her way into the living room, her breath still unsteady. Then she saw it, a shattered window. Glass fragments littered the floor, catching the early morning light. Cold air drifted into the apartment, sending a chill down her spine. Her stomach twisted. She quickly grabbed her phone and called the landlord. Minutes later, he arrived, inspecting the damage with a concerned frown. "I'll have some workers come fix this up as soon possible," he assured her. "I'll also file a report for a break-in." Emiko nodded, barely processing his words. The police arrived not long after, asking her questions she wasn't sure how to answer. She told them what she could: the shattered window, the voices outside her door, the laughter. But she left out the parts that didn't make sense. Would they even believe her? Once the workers arrived, they swiftly replaced the window and cleaned up the broken glass. As soon as they were done, she wasted no time. She needed to go. She needed to find them. The drive to the abandoned Toriyama village took 30 minutes. Each second dragged on, her grip on the steering wheel tightening as unease settled deep in her chest. Finally, she arrived. She stopped the car and looked ahead. The village loomed in the distance. From afar, the buildings looked discolored, their once vibrant paint now dull and peeling. Some structures had collapsed, their roofs caved in, leaving only hollow shells behind. The streets were cracked, overgrown with weeds, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim the land. A suffocating stillness hung in the air. Emiko swallowed hard. Her legs felt heavy, but she forced herself to move. One step at a time, she walked into the village. It was quiet, too quiet. Her heart pounded in her chest as she ventured deeper. She was scared, terrified even, but she was willing to face anything. She had to. She was going to find them. Emiko stepped cautiously through the abandoned village, peering into the crumbling buildings. Each room she entered was eerily empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, and, to her surprise, no human remains. She had expected at least some trace of those who had once lived here, but there was nothing. No bones. No graves. It was as if the village had been wiped clean. Her unease grew as she walked farther in. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and suffocating. Then, footsteps. They were faint, trailing behind her at a distance. She froze. Slowly she turned around, her breath caught in her throat. Nothing. The village was still empty. Her pulse pounded. She shook her head and turned back. A child stood before her, a little girl in a white dress. Her skin was pale, almost sickly, and her face. There was no face, just smooth, featureless skin where her eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Before Emiko could react, the child lunged. A cold, unnatural hand wrapped around her throat, squeezing tightly. Emiko gasped, clawing at the small fingers, but they were impossibly strong. Her vision blurred, her limbs weakened, and darkness swallowed her whole. When she woke, she was lying on a cold wooden floor. Her head throbbed. The air smelled of burning wax and old wood. She pushed herself up, wincing as she looked around. She was in a dimly lit hallway, lined with shoji-style doors. The flickering glow of candlelight cast long, shifting shadows along the walls. The hallway stretched on endlessly, twisting and turning into more corridors. This wasn't the village anymore. She still had her backpack. Relief washed over her for a second, until she realized something was missing. Her charm, the one Mrs. Yamada had given her. Her stomach dropped. She quickly checked for her knife. It was still there, tucked inside her bag. A sound broke through the silence. Laughter. Not a child's laughter. It was a woman's, low, crawling, and dripping with malice. Emiko's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know who that little girl was. But she knew one thing. She wasn't alone. Chapter 5. Emiko moved cautiously through the dim corridor, her fingers trailing along the aged wooden walls. She slid open a random door, peering inside. The room was sparse, just a tatami mat and a few relics of an old-fashioned home. Nothing useful. She checked another, and another. Each one was the same, as if the house were toying with her, offering nothing but empty spaces and endless pathways. Then, the laughter began. Soft at first, the voices of a boy and a girl giggling in eerie harmony. Emiko froze, her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. The girl from before stood just feet away. Her head snapped to the side with a sickening crack, her body tilting unnaturally as she took a slow, deliberate step forward. The wrongness of her movements sent a jolt of terror through Emiko. She ran. Darting down the hall, she searched frantically for a place to hide. A wooden door came into view, and without hesitation, she flung it open, slipping inside and slamming it shut behind her. No lock. She gripped her knife, pressing her back against the door, waiting, listening. But the door never opened. Instead, a sound came from behind her. Breathing. Shallow. Close. Emiko spun around just as a figure lunged at her. A boy, his skin a ghastly pale, his hollow black eyes staring into hers. His mouth stretched open, too wide, too empty. He let out a piercing, unnatural screech, his hands shoving her backward. She fell, but she did not hit the ground. Darkness swallowed her, and when she landed, she was somewhere else entirely. The room was vast, the air thick with something ancient and watching. Flickering candlelight cast long, shifting shadows against the wooden walls. Before her stood a single shoji door, delicate yet foreboding. Emiko hesitated before sliding open the shoji door, bracing herself for whatever lay beyond. A courtyard stretched out before her, eerily quiet beneath a dull gray sky. At its center stood a lone sakura tree, its pale pink petals drifting to the ground like whispers of something long forgotten. A dimly lit lantern flickered beside it, casting a weak, trembling glow over the lifeless surroundings. Stone water fountains dotted the courtyard, their basins dry and cracked, frozen in time. Cautiously, she stepped forward, her footsteps muted against the worn stone path. As she approached the tree, her eyes caught a small wooden box resting beside the lantern. Kneeling, she carefully lifted the lid. Inside, delicate sakura petals lay neatly arranged. She brushed them aside, revealing a folded piece of paper beneath them. With a sinking feeling, she picked it up and unfolded it. The words were scrawled in deep red ink, bold and jarring against the fragile paper. "It's time to join us." A chill swept through her, creeping down her spine like unseen fingers. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her grip on the note tightening. A shift in the air made her skin prickle. She wasn't alone. From behind the sakura tree, something began to emerge. The boy. But he had changed. His limbs were longer now, unnaturally stretched, his fingers and feet tapering into sharp, claw-like points. The way he moved, slithering from behind the tree, was deliberate, methodical. His hollow eyes bore into her, unblinking. He didn't advance. He only stood there, half-hidden, waiting. Emiko's pulse pounded in her ears as she weighed her options. If she ran too soon, he might lunge. If she waited too long, she might not get the chance at all. Her muscles tensed. She had to decide. The boy's sharp fingers scraped slowly against the bark of the sakura tree, carving deep, jagged marks as he clung to it. The sound sent a chill down Emiko's spine. Then, without warning, he moved. His body jerked unnaturally as he lunged toward her, his elongated limbs carrying him faster than any child should be able to move. Emiko's instincts kicked in. She spun on her heel and bolted for the nearest door. The air felt thick, her own breath loud in her ears. The boy was close. Too close. She could hear his rapid footsteps, the sickening scrape of his claws against the ground. Just as she reached the door, she felt a sharp tug at her back. A cold, stinging sensation. She stumbled forward, yanking the door open and diving through, slamming it shut behind her. For a moment, silence. Then, scratch, scratch, scratch. The boy's claws raked against the wood. He didn't pound or try to break through, just scratched, as if savoring the chase. Emiko pressed her back against the door, her breath ragged. A quick glance down revealed a fresh tear in her book bag. If she had been even a second slower, she clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath her fear. What are these things? Where is everyone? She wasn't making any progress. Just running, hiding, escaping, only to be trapped again. Her chest tightened. Her hands trembled. Then she remembered. Her mother's voice. "Breathe, Emiko. In through your nose, hold out through your mouth." She closed her eyes. Focused. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Slowly, the tension in her body loosened, her mind clearing just enough to take in her surroundings. She was in a vast, dimly lit library. Towering bookshelves stretched toward the ceiling, their spines covered in dust, some missing pages scattered across the wooden floor. The scent of old parchment and mold lingered in the air. As she stepped forward, her foot brushed against something. A book lay open, its pages blank except for a single crimson smear. A handprint. A faint sound echoed in the distance. Footsteps. Emiko froze. Far ahead, a shadow moved between the shelves. A small figure. The girl. She was walking slowly, her faceless head tilted slightly, as if listening. Emiko's breath hitched. She had to hide. She pressed herself behind one of the tall bookshelves, gripping the strap of her torn book bag. The girl had found her once before. She couldn't let it happen again. Emiko moved swiftly, darting from shelf to shelf, keeping her breathing shallow as she tracked the girl's slow, methodical movements. The dim lighting and towering bookshelves created deep shadows, perfect for hiding, if she could stay ahead. Then, she saw it. Another door. Relief flickered through her, but she didn't move right away. She had to be careful. She scanned the area, ensuring the coast was clear. Just as she stepped forward, a hand shot through the bookshelf and grabbed her wrist. A cold, clammy grip. The girl. Emiko's breath hitched as she instinctively yanked back, but the grip was unnaturally strong. She hadn't even heard the girl move. How had she gotten there so fast? Panic surged through her as she twisted and pulled, desperately trying to free herself. With a final, forceful jerk, she managed to break free, stumbling backward. There was no time to think. She turned and sprinted toward the door. Behind her, a shrill, ear-piercing screech filled the air. The girl was right behind her. Before she could reach the door, the girl lunged, tackling her to the ground. Emiko barely managed to throw her arms up in time as sharp nails raked against her skin, slicing into her forearms. She gritted her teeth, the pain sharp and searing. She had to get her off. Now, with a burst of adrenaline, she twisted, using her legs to kick the girl off with all her strength. The moment she was free, she scrambled to her feet and lunged for the door. Her fingers barely wrapped around the handle before she ripped it open and threw herself inside. She slammed the door shut behind her, just as heavy footsteps pounded toward her from the left. The boy. He was barreling toward her from the hallway, his elongated limbs jerking unnaturally as he moved. Emiko didn't hesitate. She sprinted forward, not daring to look back. The door ahead. It was her only way out. She reached it, threw it open, and slammed it shut as soon as she was through. Darkness. This section of the library was much darker. The air felt heavier, colder. Emiko fumbled for her flashlight, her hands slick with sweat and the sting of fresh scratches. She clicked the switch. Nothing. She hit it once. Twice. A flicker. Then, the light buzzed to life. A woman stood right in front of her. Emiko froze. She was clad in a tattered kimono, her eyes pitch-black voids. Her mouth, a grotesque, knife-carved smile. A deep, gaping slit ran across her throat, as if someone had tried to silence her forever. Then, the light went out. Emiko took a step back, her breath shallow. The flashlight flickered again. The woman was closer. She was levitating, her body stiff and unnatural, her bloodied hand stretching out toward Emiko. The light went out again. The darkness swallowed everything. Emiko turned to run, but the ground beneath her gave way. With a sharp gasp, she fell. Pain pulsed through Emiko's body as she slowly pushed herself up from the ground. Her limbs ached from the fall, but it was nothing compared to the lingering horror seared into her mind. The woman's grotesque, smiling mouth, the empty black voids where her eyes should have been. And the blood. Emiko swallowed hard. She hated the sight of blood. As her vision steadied, she blinked in confusion. The darkness was gone. The suffocating library, the shadows, the creeping horror, it had all vanished. Instead, a bright sky stretched above her. She was outside. The air smelled fresh, untouched by decay or fear. She turned, taking in her surroundings. Toriyama Village. But something was off. The village looked different, newer. There was no sign of age or ruin. The once dilapidated building she remembered from stories now stood tall and pristine, as if untouched by time. And then, she noticed it. A house. Brand new. Her breath caught as the front door slid open. A woman stepped outside, holding the hands of two young children, a boy and a girl. The mother smiled as she led them to a shaded spot near the house, settling down with them. With a soft voice, she began reading a story, her tone warm and soothing. Emiko watched in silence, a strange sense of familiarity prickling at her. Then, the little girl flinched. A tiny spider had crawled onto her arm. The girl whimpered, her small hands trembling as she tried to shake it off. The mother gently caught her wrist. "Calm down," she said softly. With practiced ease, she cupped the spider in her hand, holding it up for her daughter to see. "Not all creatures are harmful," she continued, her voice patient. "Some are more afraid of us than we are of them." The little girl sniffled but nodded, watching the spider scurry across her mother's fingers before it disappeared into the grass. Emiko remained frozen, something deep inside her stirring. The mother turned to her children, brushing their hair affectionately. Go inside and play, she told them. I have to run a quick errand. The children obeyed, scampering into the house, their laughter fading as the door slid shut behind them. The woman lingered for a moment, gazing after them with a soft expression. Then she turned, and for the first time, Emiko saw her face clearly. Her stomach twisted. The woman's face and figure looked familiar to her. The woman stepped away, disappearing down the path, but to Emiko, it felt like only seconds before she returned, this time with company. A group of women followed her, their laughter filling the air as they chatted amongst themselves. They seemed close, their conversation easy and familiar. But then, they noticed. One of them reached out, eyes narrowing. Your arm, she said, her voice laced with concern. The others turned their attention to the mother. Emiko followed their gazes and felt her stomach twist. Dark bruises marred the woman's skin. The mother gave a tight smile, pulling her sleeve down as if that could erase what they had already seen. It's nothing, she said lightly. I just had a little accident. Silence hung in the air. None of them believed her. But before they could press further, a voice called from the house. A man's voice. The mother tensed. Her smile, already fragile, wavered. I'll see you all next time, she said quickly before turning back toward the house. The other women hesitated, exchanging glances, but eventually, they nodded and left. Emiko did not. This time, she followed the mother inside. The moment the door shut, the man struck. A sickening smack filled the air as the woman was knocked to the floor. The children rushed out of their rooms, their eyes wide with fear. Mama! Emiko's breath hitched as she watched the woman push herself up, cradling the left side of her face, already reddening from the blow. The man loomed over her, his expression twisted in anger. You don't appreciate me, he spat. You're ungrateful. The second hit came without warning. A brutal strike that sent her head snapping to the side. Blood dripped from her nose. The children screamed. They ran to their mother, shielding her with their small bodies. Please, stop, the little girl sobbed. Don't hurt Mama. The boy clung to her as well, his tiny arms wrapped protectively around her. But their cries only made their father angrier. His face contorted in rage as he lashed out again, this time at them. Emiko's entire body locked up as she watched. Fists striking, small bodies recoiling. Cries of pain. The mother threw herself over them, shielding them with her own body. She clutched them close, her trembling voice begging, pleading for him to stop. You're all ungrateful, the man snarled. None of you respect me. His fury spent for now, he staggered away, dropping into a seat at the table, grabbing his bottle. The room fell into horrible silence. Emiko stood frozen, her hands trembling. Chapter 6. Emiko questioned how this man could do such a thing to his family without thinking twice. Time skipped again. The woman was outside, crouched near the ground, observing a praying mantis perched delicately on her hand. Her expression was soft, full of quiet admiration. It was as if animals brought her a sense of peace, an escape from the misery that lurked within her home. Emiko still felt an overwhelming sense of pity for the woman. What could she have possibly done to deserve such a cruel husband? The peaceful moment shattered. The door to the house burst open, and the man stormed outside, his face twisted in fury. Without hesitation, he seized the woman by her hair. She screamed, struggling against his iron grip, but he yanked her back toward the house. You think I don't see it? He snarled, dragging her inside. You were with another man, weren't you? Well, you were out yesterday, laughing, flirting, thinking I wouldn't find out. The woman cried out, shaking her head frantically. I wasn't with anyone. I swear. But he wasn't listening. His grip tightened as he threw her to the floor. Liar, he spat. I know you and your friends laugh at me. You're waiting for the right moment to leave me, to run off with some wealthy bastard who can give you a better life, aren't you? No, that's not true, she sobbed, clutching the floor, desperate to push herself up. I would never. Slap. Her head snapped to the side as he struck her. Blood dripped from her lips, but she didn't have time to recover before he grabbed her again. You like to smile so much, don't you? He sneered, reaching into his pocket. Let me help you keep smiling. A blade glinted in his hand. Emiko's stomach dropped. No. No, no, no. The woman screamed as he pressed the knife to her cheeks, slowly carving upward. The sound of flesh splitting, wet, grotesque, filled the room. The woman writhed in agony, her piercing wails searing into Emiko's soul. Stop! Emiko cried out, reaching for the man, but her hands passed through him like a ghost. He couldn't hear her. He couldn't see her. He stepped back, admiring his work. The woman lay on the floor, her body trembling, her face permanently twisted into a jagged, gaping smile. The man chuckled cruelly. What man would want to look at you now? Then, without hesitation, he gripped her chin and slit her throat. A choked gurgle escaped her lips as she collapsed. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the wooden floorboards. Emiko was frozen, shaking, unable to move. Her ears rang. Her breath was shallow. The man, that monster, acted as if nothing had happened. He grabbed a shovel and made his way through the back of the house, disappearing into the darkness. Emiko was left alone with the bodies. Then, the air turned thick. Wrong. The room dimmed, the very walls seeming to close in around her. And then, drip, drip. A slow, sickening sound, like something wet hitting the floor. Blood oozed onto the walls, twisting and stretching into words before her eyes. "You're not supposed to be here." Emiko's heart stopped. A wet, shuddering breath sounded from behind her. She turned, barely able to process what she saw. The bodies, they were standing. The children, once lifeless, now faced her. But their faces had changed. They were the same children that had chased her earlier. Their hollow eyes locked onto her, wide and empty. And the woman, she stood there draped in a flowing kimono, her slit throat still gaping open, her carved smile twisted into something unnatural. The air around her shimmered as she raised her hand toward Emiko. "It's time to join us." The voice, it was hers, but warped, twisted, layered with something inhuman. The woman took a slow, deliberate step forward. Emiko scrambled back, her hands slipping on the blood-stained floor. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. No. No, no, no. She turned and bolted through the front door, only to be met with darkness. The outside world was no longer the village. It was an abyss, an endless, suffocating void, except for one thing: the sakura tree, tall, gnarled, and burning. Flames twisted up its bark, devouring it, but the fire was silent. There was no crackling, no heat, just a void of destruction. Emiko turned around. The house was burning too. And then, the spiders came. At first, just a few, skittering at her feet, crawling up her legs, then more. Dozens. Hundreds. Emiko screamed as they flooded over her, tiny legs and fangs covering her skin, her arms, her neck, her face. She clawed at them, trying to rip them off, but there were too many. They swallowed her whole. And then, darkness. The suffocating weight vanished. Emiko opened her eyes. She was no longer in the burning village. She was in a pitch-black space, the ground beneath her solid but cold. And in front of her, the woman, still dressed in the kimono, still watching her. Emiko swallowed the terror in her throat. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The woman said nothing. Emiko's hands clenched into fists. Tears burned in her eyes. "Please," she begged. "Give me back my friends. Give me back my siblings." Silence. The woman did not move. Emiko's chest tightened. She was trapped. A deep, rattling exhale filled the empty void. It was slow, deliberate, wrong. Emiko froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. The woman's body twitched, then twisted. Her kimono ripped apart as something monstrous bloomed from within. A sickening crack echoed as her limbs contorted unnaturally, her once human frame stretching, warping, transforming. She was no longer a woman. A nightmare now loomed before Emiko, towering, horrifying. Its upper body retained an eerie, human-like form, but the skin, pale, corpse-like, clung too tightly to its skeletal frame, like dried parchment over bones. Her face, no, its face, was now a grotesque, mask-like visage. The porcelain-smooth surface was eerily flawless, yet utterly wrong, its hollow, soulless eyes piercing through Emiko like a predator stalking its prey. Crimson-red lines twisted across the mask like veins, curling and branching like cracks in fragile porcelain. And its mouth. That horrible, gaping mouth. Rows of jagged, blackened teeth filled the abyss behind its smeared, blood-red lips, stretching into a smile that should not be. Emiko's stomach churned. Then, from its shoulders, long, sinewy, claw-like limbs unfolded, extending unnaturally like scythes, curved and razor-sharp. And beneath it, a monstrous arachnid form emerged. Its grotesque spider body loomed huge, its glossy black exoskeleton pulsing with vein-like patterns that shimmered in the darkness. Its spindly, barbed legs twisted and bent in unnatural ways, each movement accompanied by sickening creaks and skittering sounds that sent shivers down Emiko's spine. Sticky tendrils of webbing dripped from its limbs, swaying in the mist that now clung to the air like a suffocating veil of dread. It had fully taken form. Madame Silkwraith. The stories were true. She was real. And Emiko was trapped with her. Emiko's chest heaved as she frantically searched for an escape. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Then, she saw it. A faint glow. A small opening. Just big enough for her to crawl through. It was far, but it was hope. A sickening, wet skittering filled the air behind her. Emiko turned. Madame Silkwraith was moving. Her long, twisted limbs clawed forward, her grotesque spider body gliding unnaturally across the dark space. Then, a hiss. A chilling, bone-deep sound that sent terror surging through Emiko's veins. "Run!" She bolted. Every muscle in her body screamed as she pushed herself forward. Faster. Faster. The ground trembled beneath her feet as Madame Silkwraith gained on her, the air thick with the scent of decay and damp silk. The hole was close. Emiko lunged, dropping to her knees and throwing herself through. Then, cold fingers wrapped around her ankle. Emiko gasped, twisting violently. The grip tightened. She kicked, once, twice, 3 times. A sharp, guttural snarl rang out as the grip loosened. She scrambled through the hole, panting, shaking. But the nightmare wasn't over. The hallway ahead was coated in webs. Thick, sticky strands clung to the walls, the ceiling, everywhere. She ran anyway. Her breath hitched as she heard something behind her. Then, hands grabbed her, yanking her into the darkness. She gasped, struggling. A hand clamped over her mouth. Shh. Emiko's wide, terrified eyes locked onto a familiar face. Kenji. And with him, several strangers. They were hiding. They pressed against the walls of the tiny, dark closet, barely breathing as a shadow moved beneath the crack of the door. Madame Silkwraith was here. Her long, spindly legs clicked against the wooden floor. Emiko shut her eyes. She didn't dare breathe. As Madame Silkwraith's eerie silhouette disappeared down the hallway, the group collectively let out a quiet, shaky sigh of relief. For a moment, the only sounds were their own breaths, still heavy from fear. Then, Kenji turned to Emiko. "What the hell are you doing here?" he whispered, his voice urgent but quiet enough not to draw attention. Emiko's throat felt dry. Her mind was still spinning from everything that had happened, but she forced the words out. "She took them," she said. "She took my siblings. And Risha." Silence. A few of the others exchanged glances before a young woman in the group spoke up. "She's taken people from all of us," the girl muttered, her voice heavy with grief. Kenji sighed, running a hand through his hair before motioning toward the others. "Emiko, meet the rest of us," he said. "This is Ryo, Kakashi, and Nao." The 3 nodded in acknowledgement, though their faces were marked with exhaustion. Kenji continued. "2 of us got separated earlier, but we're confident they found a safe place to hide." Emiko nodded slowly. At least there was some hope. Then she asked the question that had been weighing on her since she got here. "Have you found any hints about where your brother might be?" Kenji's expression darkened. He shook his head. "No, nothing." Nao crossed her arms, her frustration evident. "This entire place keeps shifting," she muttered. "We map one part out, and then 5 minutes later, it's different. It's getting annoying and making things harder." Emiko's heart sank. She hesitated before speaking, but she needed to know. That kept happening to me too. While I was being chased." Kenji frowned. "By her?" Emiko hesitated. "Not just her. The little boy and girl too." The room fell silent. Confused expressions flickered across their faces. "What boy and girl?" Ryo asked, narrowing his eyes. Emiko looked at them, confused herself. "The ones that chased me. Before I saw her." Kakashi shook his head. "We haven't seen any kids." Nao nodded in agreement. "We've only been hunted by Madame Silkwraith." Emiko took a deep breath, looking at the others. "You all need to be careful. Those kids, they're dangerous too." Kenji's eyes flickered with concern as he glanced at her arm. "You're hurt." Emiko followed his gaze and saw the deep scratch marks left by the girl's nails. "It's fine," she assured him. "She did it, but I'll be okay." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a half-full water bottle. "Here, does anyone want some?" One by one, they took a sip, exhaustion evident in their faces. The tension was suffocating, but the small moment of relief helped, even if just for a second. Ryo cautiously peered out of the door, scanning the hallway. He turned back and gave a nod. "Coast is clear." Kenji stretched, letting out a breath. "We'll rest for a minute before heading out. No point in rushing if we don't have to." As they sat in silence, Kakashi suddenly smirked. "So Kenji, is Emiko your girlfriend or something?" Emiko's face burned red, and she quickly covered it with her hands. Kenji rolled his eyes. "According to her, dating isn't her style." Nao chuckled. "No kidding." After the brief, awkward moment, they all stood and carefully made their way out. Chapter 7. The hallway led them to a strange new area. It looked like an old-fashioned hospital, its walls lined with dusty curtains and flickering candles that barely illuminated the dark space. The eerie silence made everyone uneasy. "Why does this place give me the creeps?" Kakashi muttered. "Because it's a hospital," Ryo replied. "Nothing good ever happens in these places." Nao sighed. "Tell me about it." "I had a terrible experience with a doctor when I was younger. Guy was a total nightmare." Emiko looked at her. "I get it. Hospitals always made me feel uneasy too." They continued exploring until they came across 2 beds in the middle of the room. The blankets were raised, as if someone or something was underneath. Everyone froze. No one wanted to lift the blankets. Kenji exhaled sharply. "Guess we have to check." With hesitant hands, they each grabbed the edge of the blankets and slowly lifted them. Nothing. There was nothing underneath. Their relief was short-lived. A chill ran down their spines as they turned around. The boy and the girl were standing right behind them. The air grew heavy. The candlelight flickered violently. The children took slow, unnatural steps forward. Their hollow eyes locked onto the group. Kenji instinctively moved, but before he could stop her, Emiko stepped forward. "Emiko, don't!" Kenji shouted. She ignored him. Emiko took a deep breath, looking at the children with a mix of sadness and determination. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You didn't deserve what happened to you. None of it. You deserved better." The boy and girl stopped. Their bodies twitched violently. Their heads jerked to the side, their mouths stretching open, releasing unnatural clicking noises. The group stared in horror. Then, without warning, the children lunged. Nao reacted instantly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small charm. She held it up, her voice firm and steady. A wave of energy pulsed through the room. The boy and girl let out horrifying, ear-splitting shrieks. Their bodies convulsed before they vanished into the shadows. Silence fell over the room. Everyone stood frozen, struggling to process what had just happened. Nao let out a breath, still panting from the intensity. That worked. Then her brows furrowed. Why did it work on them, but not on Madame Silkwraith? Emiko swallowed hard. Maybe they're not as strong as her. The others exchanged uneasy glances before nodding in agreement. But even with the children gone, they all knew that Madame Silkwraith was still out there. They moved forward with cautious steps, their hearts pounding. The dim candlelight cast long, flickering shadows across the walls. They had to keep going. They had to find their missing friends. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, and a thick, eerie silence settled over the group. Then, "Everyone! Over here!" A voice called from behind them. They all spun around. Kenji's eyes widened. "Daiki?" For a brief moment, relief washed over them, but that relief shattered in an instant. Daiki's lifeless body hung from the ceiling, a thick web wrapped tightly around his neck. Blood soaked his torn clothes, and fresh wounds carved deep into his flesh. His head drooped to the side, his arms hanging limp. His body swayed slowly. The sight alone sent a wave of pure horror crashing over them. "No," Ryo whispered, his voice shaking. Then, out of the darkness behind Daiki's body, a pale, mask-like face emerged. Hollow, soulless eyes. A jagged, nightmarish grin smeared in deep crimson. Madame Silkwraith. She was watching them, waiting. Her presence felt suffocating, as if the air had turned to poison in their lungs. Panic exploded in their chests. "Run!" Kenji shouted. They didn't hesitate. They turned and sprinted down the hallway, their footsteps thundering against the floor. Madame Silkwraith's sickening skittering echoed behind them, her clawed limbs clicking against the walls as she pursued them. As they ran, their surroundings became more horrifying. More hanging bodies swayed from the ceiling, their faces frozen in silent screams. Some were fresh, their skin still intact, their eyes glassy with death. Others had been there for a long time, their flesh rotted away, leaving behind nothing but grinning skulls entangled in webs. The floor was littered with bones. Bloodstains coated the walls, dripping down like ink. The stench of death and decay filled their noses, making their stomachs churn. Kenji glanced back for a split second. Madame Silkwraith was gaining on them. Her many legs carried her at a terrifying speed, her monstrous form crawling along the walls and ceiling. She was toying with them. "Faster!" Kenji shouted. Their lungs burned. Their legs screamed in protest. But they couldn't stop. Because if they did, they would end up like Daiki. A low, horrifying laughter echoed through the halls, crawling under their skin like icy fingers. They ran. Turning a sharp corner, they spotted a door slightly ajar. A chance. Without hesitation, they rushed inside and slammed it shut behind them. Bang! Kenji and Ryo shoved a nearby bookshelf against the door. Kakashi grabbed a chair, wedging it beneath the handle. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, adrenaline still burning in their veins. Then, tap, tap, tap. A slow, rhythmic tapping at the door. It sent shivers through them. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. And then, silence. Just as they thought the nightmare outside had passed, a shaky voice whispered from the far corner of the room. You guys?" The group spun around. Huddled in the shadows, a trembling figure sat curled against the wall. His clothes were torn, his face pale with fear. "Kenta, is that really you?" Kenji stepped forward, his voice wavering with disbelief. The young man slowly nodded. "Yeah, it's me." Relief crashed over the group, but it was quickly overshadowed by the dark truth Kenta revealed next. He told them how he and Daiki had gotten separated from the group. How they'd been hunted by two eerie children in the endless corridors of this hellish place. Then, he hesitated. "Daiki, is he okay?" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Kenji lowered his gaze. "He didn't make it." Kenta froze. The color drained from his face. No. His breath hitched, and his hands clenched into fists. Guilt. Grief. Horror. It was all there, flickering in his eyes. Emiko, standing nearby, finally broke the silence. What do we do now? Kenji exhaled, forcing himself to focus. If we can't find the people we came for, we need to find a way out of here. This place, it's like Madame Silkwraith's domain. She controls it. Everything here bends to her will. Emiko shook her head, her eyes fierce with determination. I'm not leaving without my siblings or Risha. Her voice wavered, but she held firm. They're all I have left. Kenji met her gaze. A moment of understanding passed between them. He nodded. Then we'll find them. We'll find Akira, Hana, and Risha. I promise. The others, though shaken, murmured their agreement. They weren't leaving anyone behind. Not if they could help it. They knew they'd have to take the risk. With hesitant hands and pounding hearts, they silently moved everything away from the door. The chair scraped softly against the floor as Kakashi removed it from beneath the handle. Ryo pressed his ear to the wood, listening. The hallway beyond was deathly silent. Ryo took a deep breath, then slowly cracked the door open, peeking out. Clear. He nodded. Let's go. As unnerving as it was, they decided to follow the trail of bodies. The bloodstains, the rotting corpses suspended by thick, sticky webs. It was all they had to go on. Emiko felt her chest tighten with each step. Kenji must have noticed because he gently touched her shoulder. We'll find them, okay? Just hold on. She nodded, but the dread still gnawed at her insides. Eventually, the group entered a long, narrow room. The walls were covered in paintings. Spiders. Everywhere. Dark, grotesque images of arachnids with too many legs, too many eyes, looming over faceless women dressed in kimonos. The art was crude, disturbing, as though painted in a frenzy. On the far side of the room, there was a door. Their only way forward, but the air in the room was heavy, suffocating. They all felt it, the unspoken certainty that something was very wrong. As they moved forward, the wooden floor beneath them creaked softly with each step. The flickering candlelight made the spider paintings appear to writhe on the walls, as if they were alive. Then, crack, a sharp, unnatural sound, followed by the sound of someone exhaling slowly, creepily. They froze. Something was behind them. Slowly they turned. Madame Silkwraith was there. Too close. She'd somehow snuck up on them. Her long, spindly limbs clicked against the floor. Her hollow eyes locked onto them. Her mouth curved into that terrifying blood-smeared grin. Run, Kenji started to say. But it was already too late. She grabbed Kenta. There was no struggle. No chance. With inhuman speed, she twisted his head clean off, the sound of snapping bone echoing through the room. His body hit the floor, head rolling to a stop. They stood in frozen horror, too terrified to scream. Before they could react, Madame Silkwraith was on them. She moved too fast. Her limbs slashed through the air. Ryo was next. A sickening sound of tearing flesh. His chest ripped open before he even hit the ground. Blood splattered across the wooden floor like paint, soaking the webs. Kakashi turned to run, but Madame Silkwraith was already there. One claw through his stomach, another through his throat. He collapsed in a gurgling heap. It all happened in seconds. Now only Emiko, Kenji, and Nao remained. Run! Kenji yelled, finding his voice at last. They bolted toward the door, Madame Silkwraith's clicking footsteps pounding after them. The door was getting closer, but so was she. Her presence pressed against them like a living nightmare, her ragged breathing right behind them. They could feel her closing in. And then, just as they were nearing the exit, Nao slowed. Go! She shouted. Kenji whipped around. Now, what the hell are you doing? Come on. Nao stood her ground, breathing hard, eyes resolute. I'll hold her off as long as I can. Are you insane? Come with us. Kenji grabbed her arm. Nao ripped herself away. My mom went missing years ago, Kenji. She's probably long gone. If I can give you two a chance? Madame Silkwraith's monstrous form was closing in, her claws reaching for them. Kenji screamed. Nao, please. Don't. But Nao turned and faced Madame Silkwraith head-on, standing her ground as the creature bore down on her. Emiko grabbed Kenji's wrist. Come on. He resisted, trying to pull away, but she yanked him with all her strength, dragging him toward the door. Nao stood alone, her eyes locked on Madame Silkwraith as the horrifying creature advanced. And then, the door slammed shut behind them. Nao was gone. Kenji trembled with rage and grief, his breath ragged as he collapsed to his knees. His fists slammed into the ground, over and over. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! He had lost everyone. Now, Kenta, Ryo, Kakashi, Daiki. All of them were gone, because he couldn't do anything. He clenched his jaw, his fists still shaking, but before he could strike the ground again. Emiko grabbed his hands. Her touch was firm, but gentle, grounding him. Kenji, stop. He was breathing hard, his whole body tense, but she didn't let go. We can't waste their sacrifice, she told him, her voice steady despite everything. We have to keep going. Kenji swallowed hard, shutting his eyes. After a few deep breaths, he finally nodded. He had to move forward. For them, with a heavy heart, Kenji pushed himself up. He would lead the way. Emiko stayed close behind him. After a while, without thinking, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Her grip was tight, and he could feel her shaking, but she held on. Kenji squeezed back. They pressed forward, their footsteps echoing through the suffocating darkness. Then, they entered another room. At first glance, it looked like another hallway, until they saw the walls and ceiling. Bodies, hung up like grotesque decorations, some rotting, their flesh long decayed, some fresh, their eyes empty and lifeless. But some were still breathing. Kenji and Emiko froze, staring in horror. Their minds raced, trying to make sense of it. Some of these people were still alive. Kenji swallowed hard. What the hell is this? Emiko's voice was barely above a whisper. She must keep the ones she doesn't kill right away here. Kenji's stomach churned. To just let them starve to death? Emiko nodded slowly. Maybe that's what she meant when she kept saying, "It's time to join us." Kenji shuddered. I didn't even think she could say full sentences outside of that creepy-ass laugh. Emiko hesitated before speaking again. I saw something. Kenji turned to her, confused. What? She exhaled shakily, her grip tightening around his hand. It was almost like I was seeing their past, Madame Silkwraith's past, her memories. Kenji frowned. You mean? Emiko nodded. The rumors were true. Her husband really did kill her and their children. Kenji felt a chill crawl up his spine, and after that, they haunted him until he went insane and killed himself. Silence hung between them. Then Kenji exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. So this is the aftermath of everything. Emiko nodded. The weight of the truth settled over them. This place, this nightmare, it wasn't just a haunted house. It was Madame Silkwraith's world, a world twisted by rage, sorrow, and vengeance, and they were still trapped inside it. Chapter 8. Akira, Hana, Risha. Emiko's heart nearly stopped when she saw them strapped to the wall by thick webs. Her stomach twisted at the sight. Her siblings and best friend, trapped like the others, their bodies limp, unconscious, but still breathing. No, no, no. She ran to them, pulling at the webs, but they were tough and sticky, refusing to break. Her fingers trembled as she yanked harder, desperation taking over. Kenji, help me. Without hesitation, Kenji rushed to her side. Together, they ripped away the webs, pulling down Risha first, then Hana and Akira. Emiko shook Risha gently. Risha, wake up! For a moment, there was nothing. Then Risha's eyes snapped open. She gasped sharply, sitting up in a panic, her breath uneven. It's okay? It's me. It's Emiko. Risha's wide, terrified eyes locked onto Emiko's face. Her chest heaved, but slowly she began to calm down. Then she winced, her hand clutching her arm. Emiko noticed the cut, blood seeping through the fabric. Without a word, she reached into her backpack, pulling out a bandage. She carefully wrapped Risha's wound, tying it tightly. You okay? Risha nodded weakly. Yeah, I think so. Emiko quickly moved to Hana and Akira, shaking them gently. Hana! Akira! Wake up! Akira groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Emi? Hana let out a small whimper, then blinked as her gaze focused on her sister. Emiko. Relief flooded through Emiko. You're safe now. But we need to move. Boom. A loud, pounding sound came from the door behind them, the same door they had left Madame Silkwraith and Nao behind. Boom. 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 Emiko and Kenji froze. The pounding grew louder. Then, crack. The door splintered apart, and through the shattered remains of the doorway, Madame Silkwraith entered. She towered over them, her grotesque form barely visible through the thick mist clinging to her body. In her clawed hands, she carried Nao, impaled. Nao's body hung limp, her lifeless eyes still open. Emiko's breath hitched until something on the floor caught her eye. A bottle. A small, empty bottle. Scrawled in marker across the label. Holy water. Emiko's stomach twisted. Nao must have used it to fight back, and it must have worked, even if only for a moment. Just 3 minutes. 3 minutes of resistance. And now, she was gone. Kenji stared at Nao's body, his fists clenching. Madame Silkwraith let out a low, sickening chuckle, her mask-like face twisting into something even more sinister. But she was still far enough away. They had time to run, but not enough time to save the others. Emiko's heart ached, but there was no choice. She grabbed Hana and Akira's hands. We have to go, now. Kenji grabbed Risha's wrist, and they ran. They ran forward, but the world around them twisted as if it were alive, bending and shifting with every step they took. Walls melted into darkness. Doorways vanished. The hall stretched endlessly, trying to trap them in its nightmare. There had to be an exit. Something, or someone, didn't want them to find it. Then, Risha? Emiko's heart froze as she turned. Risha, Akira, and Hana were gone. 1 second, they had been right beside her. Now, nothing. Emiko spun around, panic rising in her throat. Risha, Akira, Hana. Silence. Her pulse thundered in her ears. No, no, no. Where are you? Kenji's hand gripped her arm. Don't panic, he said. We'll find them. Emiko's hands shook, but she nodded. They ran, desperate, their voices echoing through the shifting halls. Hana, Akira, Risha. No answer. Then, Emiko. Her heart leapt. Risha's voice. Over here. Emiko whipped around, breath catching. That was her. It had to be. She was so close. She turned to run toward the voice, but Kenji snatched her wrist. Wait. Emiko stared at him. She can mimic voices, he warned. Her stomach dropped. Another call. Emiko, hurry. Closer. Emiko and Kenji slowly turned their heads toward the corner ahead. From the shadows, a figure peeked out. A woman in a kimono. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her eyes, wide, too wide. The pupils were so dilated that they swallowed almost all the white around them, making them look like bottomless voids. But the worst part, her smile. It was carved into her face, stretched impossibly wide, deep crimson gashes curling up her cheeks like a permanent bleeding grin. She stared at them, unblinking, breathing, watching. Then, she vanished. A heartbeat later, she returned, not as a woman, but as a monster, a towering, nightmarish creature, her spider legs clicking against the floor, her mouth splitting open too wide, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. Madame Silkwraith had found them, and she was coming, fast. Run! They sprinted, their lungs burning, feet pounding against the ever-changing ground. Ahead, a door with light shining behind it. The exit. It had to be. They pushed harder. But then, snap. Emiko's foot caught on something, a web. Her body lurched forward. She fell. Emiko! Kenji stopped, turning back. Madame Silkwraith closed in. Her shadow loomed over them. Kenji stepped in front of Emiko. She scrambled to get up, but he didn't move. Instead, he looked back at her and smiled. I really wish I could have taken you on a real date, he said softly. Emiko's breath caught. Kenji's expression shifted, just for a second. Sorrow, then a small, bitter chuckle. Guess my brother's probably dead after all. He turned back to the monster. So at least let me do one last thing right. Kenji, no. He glanced back at her one last time. Make it out of this for me, okay? Then, Madame Silkwraith's claw pierced through his chest. His body jerked, his eyes going wide. Then, limp, dead. Kenji! Emiko's scream shattered through the halls. Tears blurred her vision as she watched yet another person she cared about die. A sob choked her throat, but she forced herself to move, forced herself to run, because Kenji's sacrifice couldn't be for nothing. She had to survive. Emiko burst through the door. A blinding light greeted her, a way out. But her heart sank. Thick webs stretched across the opening, sealing her inside. She whipped around. Madame Silkwraith stood there, towering, unmoving. Her spindly, barbed limbs twitched as she stared down at Emiko. The carved grin on her mask-like face stretched wide in its horrific, unnatural way. And behind her, 2 children, a little boy and a little girl, silent. Their hollow, soulless eyes locked onto Emiko. She was trapped, no escape. Her body shook, but she forced herself to breathe, slowly, deeply. Then, she lifted her head and looked Madame Silkwraith in the eyes. I'm sorry, Emiko whispered. Madame Silkwraith tilted her head. Emiko's voice wavered, but she kept going. I'm sorry for what that horrible man did to you. To your children. Her voice grew stronger. You didn't deserve it. None of you did. Madame Silkwraith twitched. You were supposed to be loved, Emiko continued, stepping forward. Protected. But instead, he took everything from you. The monster stiffened. Emiko swallowed hard. I can feel your pain, she whispered. I know how it feels. Her breath shuddered. I know what it's like to lose everything. The room felt colder. I may be alive, but I've felt dead inside for so long. The only reason I keep going is for the people I have left. She lifted her hands. Please, she begged. Give them back to me. Madame Silkwraith stood still. Then, Emiko whispered, Please, Kiwa. The name rippled through the air like a broken memory. Madame Silkwraith jerked. Her claws twitched. She raised one, moving toward Emiko. But then, she froze. Her body shuddered violently. A horrific, piercing screech tore from her throat, the sound so raw and agonized that it sent chills down Emiko's spine. It was like she could feel Emiko's pain, like it was her own. Emiko's voice softened. This isn't who you are. Madame Silkwraith's body convulsed. The entire place trembled. The children behind her vanished. The walls cracked, the darkness splitting apart like fragile glass. Emiko stumbled back as the world collapsed around her. Then, the webs behind her burst into flames. The bright opening was free, a way out. Emiko didn't hesitate. She ran. As Emiko stepped through the light, a rush of cold air hit her. Her eyes fluttered open. She was outside, surrounded by trees. The dense, suffocating darkness from before was gone. The twisted nightmare was over. She sat up, her breath heavy, her hands trembling against the dirt. Then, she saw it. Toriyama Village. Just ahead, Emiko staggered to her feet and ran. The village was alive. People were everywhere. Some were stirring, groaning in confusion. Some lay still, unmoving, not breathing. Emiko's chest tightened. She spun around, frantic. Hana! Akira! Risha! A familiar voice called back. We're over here. Her heart leapt. She turned and saw them. Hana, Akira, Risha, alive. Emiko ran to them, pulling all three into a desperate, shaking embrace. Tears stung her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you were taken. Risha shook her head. Emiko, it's not your fault. She still looked dazed. Confused. I don't even know what happened. Emiko wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath. I'll explain everything later. Right now, we need to get back to the city. We have to tell the police. Risha nodded. Yeah. Let's get out of here. But, before Emiko could turn away, she saw him. Kenji, lying motionless among the others. The breath left her lungs. She walked to him, her legs feeling heavy. Then, she knelt beside him. Her hands hovered over his chest, trembling, as if she wanted to shake him awake. Even though she knew. She already knew. Tears welled in her eyes. She sat there, staring at him, for what felt like forever. Then, a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned. Risha. Her face was soft, pained. I'm sorry, she whispered. Emiko swallowed hard, her throat aching. She nodded. Then, she stood. And without another word, they left the village. The police swarmed Toriyama Village. The survivors were rescued. The dead were recovered. The news exploded with reports. Missing persons found in abandoned village. Authorities uncover shocking mystery in Hakarima's ghost town. But the truth? That never made it out. Only theories. The Spider Lady. The legend that had haunted Toriyama for decades. And speaking of her, Emiko found herself wondering, where had Madame Silkwraith gone? No, where had Kiwa gone? Did she finally move on? Or was she still there, lurking in the shadows of Toriyama Village? Emiko didn't know, and she tried not to think about it. The whole thing brought up too many memories. Memories she had spent her whole life trying to bury. Because in the end, she and Kiwa were the same. Both had suffered under the hands of a cruel man. Both had been robbed of the life they should have had. And both had lost the people they loved most. Emiko's mind drifted. To that night. To the night that changed everything. Her father had always been a drunk, a violent one. He beat her, her siblings, her mother. It was just how life was. Until, one night, he came home, angry. He accused their mother of stealing from him. Emiko and her siblings huddled in their room, listening. The yelling got worse. Then, a crash, a scream, something thudding against the floor. Then, a horrible choking sound. And then, silence. Only the sound of footsteps leaving the house. Emiko remembered waiting until it was safe. Then, finally, she and her siblings crept out of their room and saw her, their mother, lying on the floor. Blood trickled from a gash in her head. Dark fingerprints wrapped around her bruised throat. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. That was the moment everything shattered. Their father was on the run for days before the police finally caught him. But it didn't change anything. Their mother was gone. Their lives would never be the same. For a while, they had their aunt. But when she passed away, Emiko had no choice. She had to be strong. She got a job. She got an apartment. She took care of Hana and Akira, made sure they weren't taken away, all while barely keeping herself together. No matter how much therapy she had, no matter how much medicine she took, nothing ever truly fixed it. But now was different. Because for the first time in years, she saw that she wasn't truly alone. She had others in her situation who need her help. Not just physically, but emotionally. Steam rose from the bowls of udon, filling the small apartment with a warm, comforting aroma. Emiko, Riesha, Akira, and Hana all sat together at the table, the soft clinking of chopsticks the only sound for a moment. Then, Emiko broke the silence. I got a job offer from some important people in Nemanica, she said, glancing at Risha. They're offering good pay, and it sounds like a fresh start. Risha raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? Doing what? I'm not exactly sure yet, Emiko admitted. But it's something serious. They asked me to come in person to discuss the details. Risha nodded. slurping up a bite of noodles before asking, "Where in Nomonica?" A small smile played on Emiko's lips. Saint Rene City. Risha's chopsticks froze mid-air. Saint Rene? She repeated. That was her hometown, a place she hadn't been to in years. Risha leaned back with a sigh. You know, I kinda missed home anyway. Emiko gave her a knowing look. Want me to put in a good word for you? Risha grinned. Hell yeah. Days later, within a heavily secured government facility, high-ranking officials gathered in a dimly lit conference room. Papers were scattered across the long table, detailed reports on Toriyama Village, eyewitness accounts, and disturbing new investigations. The topic at hand was clear: Madame Silkwraith. They had no idea what to do about her. She wasn't just some local legend anymore. She was real, a terrifying, supernatural force that could not be easily contained. A man in a dark suit, seated at the head of the table, sighed heavily. There has to be a way to handle this, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Just then, the doors opened. A staff member stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Sir, he addressed the Prime Minister. The 5 head members of the Nomonica government have reached out. They're planning to visit us in person to discuss about the topic. The room fell into stunned silence. Several officials stiffened. Others exchanged uneasy glances. And then, one by one, their expressions shifted to pure dissatisfaction.